Hello, Petals. How you doing? How you enjoying the weather? How's your week been? Is everything going okay? We have had some amazing suggestions for the next series to go into, and I'm really excited about exploring these a little bit further. So far, we've got Tom Holt, Robert Rankin, Terry Pratchett, and Robert Asprin. So we've got some very, very good suggestions and individual books from each of those. And I'm very, very excited about having a look in to see what we can do about them. You know, it's crazy. It's been so long since I started a new series that I'm bewildered by it and a little bit daunted. But today we're going to be doing chapter 11 of Life, Liberty and the Pursuit of Sausages, J.W. Wells and Co. Book 7 thereof. There's always those milestones in a book, and I find that after you get sort of like past chapter 10 and you get into those double digits sort of the 11Ts and 12Ts and 13Ts, you know the tweens, that you know that you're nearly finished and you almost don't want to be. The suggestions are also awesome. It might even get to the point where I've got to put them into a hat and draw one out and take it from there. So as ever though, please let me know how you're getting on. I'm loving our little chats. I know I say it every time, but I really do enjoy them. Please hit the like button if you enjoy it. Hit the notifications bell so you don't miss any episodes. And if you can, share or subscribe. That's also awesome, but no pressure to do so because it's just nice to have you here. Yes. Chapter 11. Where is he? Roared Jack to Desi as he surged through the front office like a tidal wave and broke against reception. I'll kill him. The receptionist smiled at him. As luck would have it, Mrs. Hacksmith had just started a 2-week holiday, and the temp who was filling in for her was young and beautiful, and Jack Tedeschi noticed things like that, the way a spy satellite notices troop movements. His anger and sense of purpose both dissipated a little. Is your boss in? He said. Still the smile. Sorry, I'm new here. This is my first day. Who are you wanting? Mr. Horse. I'll see if he's available for you. 4 minutes went by, during which Mr. Tedeschi learned some really quite interesting stuff about Wayne and Colleen from a 9-month-old copy of Hello. He was holding the magazine sideways and grinning when Mr. Quoss came out and apologised for keeping him waiting. No bother, Mr. Tedeschi replied, absent-mindedly folding the magazine lengthwise and stuffing it into his coat pocket. Good of you to see me at such short notice. Come on through, Mr. Horse said, and ushered him into the lift. So, Jack, how's things? The use of his first name may not have quite woken the sleeping tiger of Mr. Tedeschi's wrath, but it nudged the tip of its tail. Why was it, he wondered, after all the deals they'd done together, that Mr. Horse called him Jack? But he didn't even know what Horse's first name was. A bit standoffish, he'd often thought, a wee tad superior, like at school, where the teachers can call you any damn thing they like, but you've got to call them sir. He'd toyed with hailing Mr. Horse as Hughie or Huzzer, but decided that would be going a little bit too far. So he'd shelved the matter and let it fester as a Class 3 minor grudge. Not so good, he replied. You know that land you sold me? It's gone. Whatever the reply he'd been expecting, it hadn't been, oh, or at least not, oh, in that tone of voice. I'm sorry to hear that, Jack, Mr. Horse went on. I can see why you're probably a bit concerned. A bit concerned? Like describing the Vietnam War as a bit of a scrap. You don't sound at all surprised, he said. I'm not. The lift stopped. Mr. Horse made an after-you-herding gesture. Truth is, you're not the first person I've heard that from today. Not by a long chalk. Mr. Tedeschi walked a few steps, then stopped dead, like a mule. Are we talking about the same thing? When I said it's gone? Sigh. I should think so.
Yes. Let's see, you went out there to take a look at it and you couldn't find it. If you're suggesting I can't read a map...
Mr. Horse didn't seem to have heard him.
Nothing to see, I don't suppose. No great big gaping hole or anything like that. Just, well, not there anymore. Like all the surrounding fields had sort of healed up around where it used to be. Well, pretty much, Mr. Tedeschi said feebly. Look, what the hell's going on? You're making it sound like it's normal or something.
Mr. Horse just looked tired.
Naturally, you'll get your money back, he said, and it'll only be fair if I covered all your out-of-pocket expenses. Surveyors, architects, planning consultants and so on. If you'll get your people to mail me a breakdown...
Listen, Mr. Tedeschi realised he'd grabbed Mr. Horse's arm. It was like stone. He quickly let go. Listen, he repeated. Screw the money.
That's very generous of you, Jack.
Tell me, Mr. Tedeschi shouted in his face. What is going on? Mr. Horse shifted his head a degree or so and looked straight at him, at which moment, if he'd been offered a choice, Mr. Tedeschi would have cheerfully torn up the contract, forfeited the money, and undertaken never to mention the deal ever again, just as long as Mr. Horse stopped looking at him like that.
And why not?
He sighed.
You know what? I might just do that. I've never told anybody, you see. Not even Stan Gogarty. Sorry, you don't know him. Just forget you heard the name. But what the hell?
Suddenly, he was alive again, alert, almost crackling with energy.
In here,
he said, pushing a door open. Not an office, Mr. Tedeschi noticed, more a sort of...
That's a toilet,
he pointed out.
Fine, I'll stand. You can have the seat.
Mr. Horse sort of nudged him, only a little gentle pressure, but so expertly applied that Mr. Tedeschi had no choice. He lost his footing, stumbled a yard or so, backed into something solid, thumped down onto it and found he was sitting on a closed toilet lid.
Are you sitting comfortably?
Mr. Horse asked cheerfully as he closed and bolted the door.
Then I'll begin.
It was bad enough facing a crowd of 30 women, all staring at him expectantly and impatiently. It certainly didn't help that, although they were definitely human, he could also see them as chickens. But what was really screwing him up was the knowledge that all of them, yes, all of them, were lawyers. He cleared his throat.
Ladies,
he said. All 30 of them glowered at him. That was the moment when he realised that if he'd been born a fox, he'd have starved to death years ago. He said, and then his voice stopped working, a failure so abrupt and total it was hard to believe Microsoft didn't have anything to do with it. He looked back to see if his fellow male was going to help him out, but that didn't seem likely. Charles Minot Harrison, former conductor of the Liverpool Philharmonic, slayer of rival cockerels, and currently the Coup's designated alpha male, was hiding behind him, shaking like a leaf. Fortunately, that was when Ms. Byron took charge, stepping in front of him and gently edging him out of the way. "Listen, everyone," she said. "Will everyone who's really a human please raise their wing hand?" "All right," she went on, as a forest of wings lifted into the air, waited to be counted, and then, from sheer force of habit, flapped a bit. "Looks like that's, all of us. All right," she continued. "Wings up, anyone who is not a lawyer." Not a feather stirred, and Miss Byron nodded. "Now then," she said, "wings up, anyone who hasn't got a who's a musician of some sort. Chickens have no eyebrows, so Kevin couldn't do a bewildered frown. "All of them?" "Something very screwy," Miss Byron said, slowly and clearly, like a good teacher, "has been going on, but it looks like it may be getting better, though I can't say that for sure." "Fine," Miss Byron said, and her voice was quieter, as though she was trying to deal with a whole lot of implications all at once. "The question is, we going to do? If she'd been expecting suggestions, she was out of luck. Kevin waited to see what she'd say next. All right, Ms. Byron went on, and now she sounded like what she was, the duly elected leader by default. So here's how I see it. Here we are, 37 human beings who somehow have been turned into chickens. I don't know. She raised her voice to quell the incipient low hum of clucking. I don't know how it happened. None of us knows that. I don't know why it happened to us. Why we're all with me. Lawyers with brothers who play musical instruments. To be perfectly honest with you, I really couldn't give a damn as long as there's some way we can make it stop and get back to normal. She paused. Dead silence. She had their undivided attention. I suggest she said, we get help. It didn't go down terribly well, but they were still listening. And how, you may well ask, she went on, do we go about doing that? Good question. Obviously, we can't talk to humans, even if we could find a human to talk to. Anybody remember seeing one lately? No, me neither. We can't talk, we can't phone. She paused for effect. We can text or send an email. Agreed? 30-odd pairs of round eyes were watching her intently, but nobody clucked. Which means, she went on, but you need to get to a phone or a computer, which in turn means we need to get out of this coop. If we can do that. A large brown speckled Sussex in the front row interrupted her. Just who do you propose we contact? She said. The police? The army? The RSPCA? Who the hell is going to Reeve? We'll cross that bridge when we come to it, Miss Byron replied, so firmly that the speckled Sussex took a step back and stood on one leg. Whatever we're going to do, we can't do it stuck in here. Put it another way, nobody could admire Gandhi more than I do, but I really don't think passive resistance and non-violent protest is going to cut it for us. Not in these circumstances. We've got to get out of here, get into the nearest house and find something we can type into. Now, has anybody got any ideas about how we can do that? 37 chickens looked around. They saw a framework of 12 solid 3-inch thick 7-foot-high posts, to which had been nailed an impenetrable barrier of wire netting, the whole area covered on top with a tarpaulin to comply with anti-bird flu regulations. There was one door, a wooden frame covered in inch mesh, securely tied top and bottom with baler twine. It was Alcatraz, and they were the bird women. Depression and despair multiplied by 36, but Miss Byron's head was still held high, and her perfectly round eyes were still bright as she scuffed at the dusty floor with her triple-toed, claw-ended feet. Only one thing for it, she said. We dig a tunnel. Back at his office, Mr. Goggety washed, shaved, changed his underwear and shirt and brushed his teeth. A cup of tea would be nice. He looked in the Tupperware box next to the kettle, but all the tea bags were gone. There was, however, half a pot of cold tea left over from the day before yesterday. Narrator's note. What? Back to the story. So he put the spout between his lips. Narrator's note. Oh! Back to the story. And glugged 4 times. Fine. Now he'd go and visit Kevin Briggs. Narrator's note. Back to the story. First, however, he checked his messages, just in case. Sanderson's. Could he ring Mr. Ibrahim at his earliest convenience about the Eye of Odin case? He frowned and made a note on the pad. The Massachusetts Institute of Thaumaturgy wanted to consult him about a potential product liability suit. Could he call ASAP? He sighed. MIT was just the sort of client he was anxious to attract, but right now he couldn't spare the time. Schlegel and Jung. Any progress with the missing 10 years from the 17th century? He was quite glad he'd missed that call. Someone by the name of Don Mayo wanted to consult him about some really weird stuff which he couldn't explain on the phone. Please could he ring back on this number? He wrote it down out of force of habit, or else he could reach him at this address. Mr. Goggerty stopped dead, frozen in the act of knotting his tie. Then he rewound and played back the last bit of the message. Except for one number, the address was the same as the one he'd written in his notebook when he'd looked up Kevin Briggs. Hooray for serendipity! He sat down and pecked in the number with the butt of his pencil. 3 rings before a rather high, slightly nerdish man's voice helloed. "Stanley Goggerty," he said, "returning your call." "What? Oh, right. Yes, hello. Thanks for calling back. Mr. Goggerty thought. The public. Not an entity he ever chose to do business with, not that he had anything against them as such, but whenever they were involved in a case, they tended to complicate it. For one thing, they didn't think properly. Professional people think in straight lines, the shortest distance between the two relevant points. At their best and brightest, the public think in a series of wide, concentric loops, their thought processes in slow, lazy orbit around the matter in hand. "You wanted to consult me about a problem?" Mr. Goggerty prompted. "Yes." Mr. Goggerty closed his eyes and counted to 10. After a lifetime of dealing with the public, he'd learned to count 10 very, very quickly. "What did you want to talk to me about?" Arguably, of course, it wasn't entirely their fault. They've been trained practically since birth to live in awe of the professional classes, so naturally they get a little bit tongue-tied. Understandable, but very annoying.
"Well, it's complicated," the voice said. "I'm not sure where to begin, really, and I'd rather not discuss it over the phone. Can we come and see you or something?"
Mr. Goggerty noticed the change from singular to plural.
"Better still," he said. "It so happens I've got a call to make in your neck of the woods, so I'll drop in and see you."
He glanced at his watch, automatically correlating the triplicate reading.
"Would say 10:30 be convenient?"
There's a particular tone of voice, immediately recognisable, that's only ever used by an Englishman who thinks someone's about to try and sell him something. Mr. Goggerty frowned. He didn't want to scare this mayor character off by sounding too enthusiastic, but the prospect of a possible new lead was flooding him with nervous energy.
"Well," he snapped, "sorry to rush you, but I'm on a schedule."
Mr. Mayo was discussing something with an offstage female voice. He heard it hiss, "Oh, for crying out loud, Don!" and that seemed to resolve the issue.
"Yes, that's fine," said Mr. Mayor. 10:30, my place. See you there."
If asked, Mr. Goggerty would deny he was an intuitive sort of guy. Conclusions firmly based on solid evidence refined by logical analysis, that was how he liked to conduct his business. Hunches were for amateurs and charlatans. It was a bit galling, therefore, to have to admit to himself that he had a hunch. Not just any hunch, a mega hunch, a hunch the size of the Sydney Opera House about this mayor person. Defiantly, as he finished knotting his tie and doing up his shoelaces, he tried to rationalise it. The synchronicity, for one thing. He wished he'd had the presence of mind to ask Mr. Mayor how he'd heard about him. Something else as well. A certain desperation in his manner, a hint of honest-to-goodness panic. Understandable in a member of the public coming up against some manifestation of the world of the profession for the first time, but maybe there was a bit more to it than that. Also, he remembered, Mr. Mayor hadn't asked him what his charges were. A significant omission, but one that could mean many things. Well, no point speculating about data. He shut the office door and locked it, sprinted briskly down the stairs into the street, and hailed a passing taxi. It drove straight past him without stopping. He frowned. Now, that wasn't supposed to happen. Among his many accomplishments, Mr. Goggerty had a firm grasp of the words of command. He could raise storms and quell them, subdue lions, elephants, and small yapping dogs, bring about partial eclipses of the sun, summon lifts, attract the attention of barmen and waiters, and, up until that precise moment, hail taxis. Basic stuff. Asking him to do it was like asking Gordon Ramsay to boil an egg. No more taxis to be seen anywhere. He glanced at his watch. Wouldn't do to be late. He started to walk, heading east, and caught the tube at Livingston Square. A train came along straight away, and he had the carriage to himself. Coincidence, he thought, as the train rattled deep into the earth. Coincidence is a technical term for a pattern of events you're too stupid to identify. He called up a street map on his phone screen and zoomed in on the immediate vicinity of Clevedon Road. There was, he felt certain, something basic and obvious that he'd been missing right from the start. Furthermore, it was a wood-for-tree sort of thing, the kind of thing he might overlook, but which would be obvious to an untrained civilian. He hated those. Frowning, he turned the map upside down and then rotated it to the left through 90 degrees. The train stopped, the way they do. At first he barely noticed, then he told himself to be patient. Then he looked at his watch. Only one dial. Bad. He ordered himself to stay calm and looked slowly around the empty carriage. Nothing to see. No sinister shapes lurking in the shadows. Everything was as normal and mundane as it could possibly be, but his hands were sweating, his heart was going like a lawnmower engine, and his watch had only one dial instead of the 3 it had been made with. It was then that he remembered that the Livingston Square tube station wouldn't be built until 2016. Well, thought Mr. Williams, peering through the shop window. Never been here before. Not that he minded. It'd been a very long time since he'd seen anything other than pavement, tarmac, the frontages of other shops. Today the view from the window was of a beautiful green meadow with a backdrop of mist-wreathed hills. He unlocked the front door and stepped outside to find himself standing on the verge of a single-track lane. Stow me, he thought. The countryside. Eileen, he called out, come and look at this. She'd be pleased. She used to like the countryside back in the days before it. That was all so long ago now that he wasn't sure there was still any countryside left, the rate they were building houses nowadays. He wouldn't be at all surprised if they'd used it all up. Apparently not. From where he was standing, he couldn't see a single man-made structure, unless you counted gates and hedges. Not, he couldn't help thinking, an ideal spot for a dry cleaners, but since they'd only be there for a day, it didn't matter terribly much. Maybe, the idea burst in his mind like a firework, they could shut the shop and go for a walk, take a picnic lunch even, make a day of it. Could this possibly be its way of granting them a well-deserved, much-needed holiday? What is this then? Eileen said. Dunno. He turned and smiled at her. Nice so, isn't it? It's the middle of nowhere. Yes. Suddenly his heart was full of joy and certainty. Eileen, love, how about taking the day off? She stared at him. What? You mean not open the shop? That's right. We can't. Why not? We can't. She'd lowered her voice as if she was afraid it might hear her. We've got to open the shop, otherwise... He smiled. But there's no customers, he said gently. Like you said, it's the middle of nowhere. Now it was his turn to whisper. Know what I think? I reckon it wants us to have the day off. Otherwise, why bring us here where there's no people? You don't know that, she said. There could be a town or something nearby. Where? He pointed through the open door. Just think, Eileen, he said. We could go for a stroll, just the two of us. Fresh air. When was the last time we walked more than 10 yards without coming up against a wall? She shrank back a step. I don't like it, she said. It doesn't feel right. Shut the door, for crying out loud. It's giving me the creeps. That's just because it's been so long, he replied gently. Think about it. When was the last time we went out that door and shut it behind us? She shook her head. I don't know. And you know why? Light was spreading inside his head, and he wanted to laugh out loud.
Because every time we even think about leaving the shop, some bugger comes in with a load of dirty clothes that want cleaning, so we never get time.
He stood perfectly still and quiet, as though waiting.
See,
he said happily.
No customers.
That's because you've still got the close sign up. She had a point. He reached back and twisted the sign around.
There,
he said.
Now we're open for business. Official.
He waited again. 10 seconds.
Well?
She looked up at him, and mixed in with the fear in her eyes there was hope. You're right, she said. Normally we'd have had a customer in by now.
We could take a picnic.
He'd chosen the right line of argument. Her eyes softened and widened, and she whispered, I've got that cold chicken.
Fantastic.
And a bit of cheese and some salad. Oh, could we? It would be...
Yes, he thought. It would. Come on, he said, before anyone comes along.
It didn't take her long to pack the picnic basket. She didn't even stop to do her hair or put on a face. 10 minutes later, they locked the shop door behind them and set off down the lane, not looking back. In the distance, sheep were bleating, birds were singing, and those were the only sounds. No subliminal rumble of traffic, no dull pulse of someone else's music vibrating through the walls, no background hum of the machines, no gabbling voices of customers. The sun was bright and gently warm, real light, not electric. They'd forgotten how different real light was, and a faint breeze stirred the leaves in the hedge, just enough to cool them. They walked for 10 minutes, following the lazy curves of the lane, and then Eileen said, Did I remember to turn off the gas?
Probably,
he replied. Maybe we should go back and...
No.
She didn't argue. In fact, she hardly said a word. She was too busy looking about her, as if she'd never seen anything like this before. They stopped in a gateway and took in the view. Below them, a great meadow rolled gently down to a beach-shaded river, then swept back up to a distant skyline. There were cows, black and white against the green, and a red tractor crept along the top of the ridge, slow as a beetle. She looked at him. How long?
No need to rush,
he replied. The lane started to climb, a gradient so slight they hardly noticed it. They passed a small wood, beyond which the hedge gave way to post and rail fencing, so they could see even further. A rabbit darted out in front of them, paused for a moment to stare, then bolted into the long grass at the side of the lane.
This is really nice,
he said. Yes, she replied. A bend in the lane brought them to a cluster of buildings. A farmhouse, presumably, with a yard and outbuildings. They peered over a low wall and saw a big fat pig sprawled comfortably in the doorway of its sty. It reminded them both of Eileen's cousin Norman, but neither of them said anything. He looks happy, Eileen said.
It's a she,
he pointed out.
So it is.
Neither of them mentioned the fact that it was the first life form they'd seen that close to in years, whose washing they hadn't had to do. Didn't need saying. They were out of the shop and they were together, and the sun was shining. Compared with those 3 enormous facts, anything else was so small and trivial it didn't merit attention, except as a component of the most beautiful day either of them could remember. It's so normal, she said at last. That's why it's so special. At which point an engine revved wildly in one of the buildings. They turned to look, and saw an elderly Ford Cortina, draped in cobwebs and plastered with mud and straw, burst through the side of a long wooden shed, scattering splinters of plank and weatherboard like confetti. It raced across the yard, swerved to avoid a parked tractor, scrunched its offside wing against the wall, backed up, hit the corner of a barn and stalled. It appeared to be being driven by chickens.
He's late,
Don said nervously. It had taken all his courage to go back to the flat. He'd been sure they'd get there to find the police waiting for them, or the army, or the SAS, or sinister men in grey suits or white coats, or, worse still, Ms. Briggs. She'll be at work, Polly had pointed out.
She might not be. She could have taken the day off. After all, it's her brother. If I'd gone missing, you'd take the day off.
Possibly. It would depend on how busy we were.
How sweet, he thought. Anyhow, he's late,
he said, peering through the sitting-room window, which commanded a superlative view of the dustbins in the yard below.
I don't think he's going to show.
He's 5 minutes late, Polly pointed out. Maybe he's been held up in traffic. Look, she added, as he started pacing again. This has got to stop, right? This is your home. You live here. Sooner or later, you've got to get a grip and move back in, she didn't say. It hadn't been easy, having her brother as a house guest. On balance, she would have preferred to have rats.
That's easy for you to say, he retorted. You're not the one who murdered his next-door neighbour.
Don't start that again.
Why not? Strikes me it's the leading issue of the day.
The phone rang and he jumped a foot in the air.
You get that, he hissed. Pretend it's the wrong number.
She gave him a very sour look and picked up the phone. Hello? Sorry, he's not here right now. Can I? Oh, yes, right. Yes, got that. Thanks then. Bye. She put the phone down and turned to face him. It'd gone ever such a funny colour, pale pink with natural yoghurt highlights.
Well,
he hissed. They can deliver your new fridge on Wednesday, she said. For pity's sake, Don, don't be such a baby.
Well, I wasn't.
I'm going to get something to drink. She went into the kitchen, leaving him sunk boneless in his chair. Magic, he thought. If it's so much hassle, why the hell would anybody want it in the first place? She was right about one thing, though. He couldn't go on like this for much longer, scared of the phone, driven out of his own flat, forced to live with his sister. Never again, he vowed, he'd rather buy an old van and sleep in that. Maybe it was time he pulled himself together and just said no. Polly came back into the room. Your fridge is on the blink, she said. The little light's not coming on, and everything inside is rapidly turning into compost. 1 second. Then they stared at each other.
Just as well, Don said quietly. They're delivering a new one on Wednesday.
Her eyes widened. You mean you haven't?
Last time I looked, that one was working just fine, so no, I haven't ordered a new one.
Oh. She backed up against the sofa and sat down. That's...
And before you say it, he said angrily, yes, I'm sure I didn't buy a new fridge. Yes, I'm absolutely bloody positive the old one was working a couple of days ago.
He froze, then lifted his head and stared at her.
What's the date today?
It's the... She frowned. I don't know. I've lost track. Hang on, I'll look on my phone.
No, don't, he said quickly. I don't think I want to know after all. Was there any beer in the fridge?
What? No.
Pity.
The last time he'd opened it, it'd put 6 cans in there. Time wasn't just messing him about, it was helping itself to his beer. That, he felt, was going just a little bit too far.
We need that Goggerty bloke, he said heavily. Someone's got to sort out this mess. I can't do it, you can't do it, there must be something.
He realised what he was doing. In books, old-fashioned ones, people in a state of heightened emotion tear out their hair. He'd never known anybody do it for real, except apparently him. He looked at the wisps of hair he was clutching between finger and thumb. Well, he thought,
pity for it to go to waste.
Don, Polly said, what are you? He spat on the hairs and dropped them, and they grew. When they were the size of rolling pins, they sprouted heads, arms and legs. Polly made a horrified squealing noise, but he shushed her.
Magic,
he explained. The hairs, there were 7 of them, stopped wriggling on the floor, stood up, formed a line and bowed to him.
At your service,
they chorused. Embarrassing or what? Nevertheless, he gave them what he hoped was an encouraging nod.
Go and find Stanley Goggerty and bring him here, he said, assuming he wants to come, he added quickly, but by then it was too late. The hairs had already shot up into the air, where they hovered for a split second before zooming, rocket-like, through the window, which opened itself at the very last moment to let them through. Polly was giving him a look that would probably have etched steel. You said Changed my mind. Look, I've had it up to here with the weird stuff. I just wanted to stop. This Goggerty bloke... He sighed. If he can't help us, maybe he can tell us who can. If that doesn't work, I don't know what I can do. That's it, basically. That's me finished.
He sat down and slumped forward, elbows on the knees, a picture of despair. Not a Rubens or a Titian or a Degas or even a Picasso of despair. Other works by this artist you might enjoy include The Gypsy Dancer and The Lady of Spain, and can be bought off the railings in the Bayswater Road. "Pack it in, Dawn," Polly said crisply. "Why didn't you tell me you've been doing magic?"
I haven't,
Dawn growled back.
Only the hair trick. I got us away from that horrible Briggs woman with it. Otherwise it's been useless.
"But you can do it."
No. Well, maybe. I don't know. I don't want to know either.
"But Dawn,
for crying out loud,"
he yelled at the floor.
"This isn't some handy labour-saving gadget. It killed that stupid idiot upstairs. We can't use it, Polly. It'd be like trying to use a nuclear bomb to shift stubborn stains."
"You just did." Polly had a real gift for that sort of thing, being right in teeny-weeny matters of detail while being utterly wrong about the big stuff.
"Yes,"
he said. "You sent magical creatures to abduct a perfect stranger and drag him here."
"Well, he shouldn't be late for appointments," Don replied. "If I ran my business like that, I'd be..."
"You're never on time for anything. You told me yourself. Once, when he was young, on a visit to the aquarium, he'd stood in front of the piranha tank and wondered what it would be like to be nibbled to death by hundreds of tiny jaws. Since then, he'd had many lively debates with his sister and reckoned he could guess just fine.
"All right," he said. "You suggest something. Got any bright ideas?"
Polly was quiet for about a second. "Yes," she said. "Where's that thing?" Amazingly, he was able, through long experience, to translate.
"You mean the pencil sharpener?"
"Yes. Fetch it here. I want to see it." Another man might have asked why. Another man might have put his foot in the apparently calm and placid waters, only to have it stripped to the bone in a millisecond.
"All right," he said. "Hang on. I'll get it."
He had hidden it, after much internal debate, in the carrier bag in which he stockpiled his used underwear until such a time as supplies ran out and laundry became inevitable. Nobody, he reasoned, not even the most determined thief, would go in there after it. He reappeared with the bag, took the pencil sharpener out, wiped it on the tail of his shirt and put it down in the exact centre of the living room table. "That's it?"
"Yes."
"You're sure?"
"Of course not," he snapped. "It's just an inference I draw from the fact that my life started going down the toilet the moment I first set eyes on the bloody thing. It'd probably be better if you didn't..."
She already had, and was turning it over in her hand. "Oh, look," she said. "There's writing on it."
"Which I'm hoping this Goggerty bloke will be able to read. I can't. You can't."
"Yes, I can." Freewheeling too fast downhill on his bicycle and suddenly finding the brakes didn't work, the same feeling of...
"Oh, you can?"
It says,
"But you can't," Don insisted. "It's magic writing. Probably you've got to chuck it in a fire or something to make the letters show through."
"It's Russian," Polly said calmly. "I did Russian GCSE, remember? It says..."
"Well?"
She put the pencil sharpener back on the table. "I don't know," she said. "I only got a D. But that's all right," she went on brightly. "I've still got my dictionary. I can look it up."
"Russian?"
She nodded. "Cyrillic alphabet." "What did you think it was?" He pretended he hadn't heard that.
"No reason why they shouldn't have magic in Russia if they've got it over here," he said grudgingly. "You sure you can't make out what it says?"
"Hang on. I'll have another look. It's something something, and then I think it's just initials." "Oh."
"What?"
"Really, I'm just guessing, but..."
"What?"
"Made in the USSR," she said, and dumped the pencil sharpener unceremoniously on the table. "Oh well." Don sighed.
"Never mind," he said. "At least we know something about it, even if that something is no bloody use at all."
He frowned.
"If it's Soviet era..." Maybe it's some kind of spy stuff. You know, KGB Department of Dirty Tricks.
She shrugged. Maybe. So what?
At least then it would be proper technology, he said,
a bit more cheerfully,
as opposed to the sodding supernatural. Maybe it's an experimental high-tech device that went wrong. During the Cold War, both sides were researching some pretty wacky stuff.
She looked at him in mild disbelief. I see, she said. So, if it's a dimension-bending, reality-skewing gadget, it's all right, just as long as it's not magic. Dawn, you're very strange.
Think about it, he urged. If it's technology, then somewhere there's some laws of physics it's got to obey, in which case maybe we could figure it out. At least it wouldn't be cheating.
It really makes a difference to you, doesn't it? A sad look spread across his face like melted ice cream.
Just kidding myself, he said. Even if it's man-made rather than super bloody natural, it can still vanish people and turn hares into flying robots. We're still screwed, unless this Goggerty bloke can sort it all out.
Digging the tunnel hadn't been nearly as hard as he'd imagined it would be. Chicken feet are designed to shift Earth. Chicken feet motivated by human minds get the job done in no time flat. Ms. Byron organised them into teams. 10% of the workforce, 3 chickens, worked the face, scrabbling dirt and stones backwards to be cleared out of the tunnel by the rest of the flock, stationed in a continuous relay the length of a chicken leg apart. It was a bit like playing football in a narrow corridor, with only reverse passing allowed. Kevin quite enjoyed it. It reminded him of kicking up drifts of dry leaves when he was a kid. Once they'd broken through and emerged warily into the vast, uncertain, fox-infested wilderness beyond the wire, it took all Ms. Byron's moral authority to keep them from scuttling back down the hall again, or wandering off in search of worms and protein-rich earwigs. She did it, though. Standing on one leg while scratching at dottles of mud in her belly plumage with the other, she was practically Churchillian as she urged them not to waver in their quest. A phone, she reminded them. All they needed was a phone, or a PC, or a fax machine, and before they knew it they would be human again, and in a position to go back to their desks and their loved ones. If she believed that, nobody else did. But it sounded very fine when she said it. She split them up into 7 search parties and dispatched them to investigate the outbuildings. Kevin felt very proud when she chose him to be in her team, and it was pretty well inevitable that they should be the ones to make the discovery. It wasn't what they were supposed to be looking for, of course. It was a mouldy old car. There's one in every shed in every farmyard in the country. It's exactly what we need, Miss Byron said firmly. All we've got to do is get it started. Drive to the nearest town. It's a clear sign that you're a born leader when nobody agrees with you, but nobody disagrees with you either. Well, at least not out loud. Getting inside the car was no big deal, since the driver's side window had been helpfully left wound down. Keys in the lock were, of course, too much to hope for. We don't need keys, Miss Byron said scornfully. Get the bonnet open and hotwire it. The bonnet opener, tucked down under the dashboard, was one small plastic lever for a man, but a giant immovable girder for chicken kind. They tried flying up and hanging on it with their beaks. They tried forming a poultry pyramid by standing on each other's heads and leaning on it. One particularly resourceful Buff Orpington flew out of the car window and came back with a yard of baler twine clenched in her beak. They tied one end to the lever, a small miracle in itself, looped it round the gear lever as a capstan, and hauled on the other end until the lever snapped off, leaving a half-inch stub. Only then did a small, nervous Marin Bampton point out that there was a whole mess of wires hanging down where the dashboard had come loose, and maybe they could trace them back and figure out which two connected to the ignition. Once they'd done that, it was a simple matter of picking off the insulation and holding 2 ends of bare copper twist together. Incredibly, the battery was not flat. With a roar that sent 2 nervous Warrens into a premature molt, the engine started. Right, Ms. Byron said. You 4 perch on the steering wheel. You 2 stand by to shift the gear lever into first. You 2 see what you can do with the rest of the gear lever. I'll do the accelerator myself. By the time they hit the side of the shed, they must have been doing at least 15. Ooh. The plank wall didn't stand a chance. After that, things got a bit out of claw for a while, but as Ms. Byron maintained later, they were just getting the hang of it when they hit the stupid barn and stalled the engine. Look, Kevin said. Humans. Man or chicken, he was used to people not listening to him. Fair enough. He never had anything important to say. This time, though, he couldn't help feeling was different. He raised his voice quite a lot and said, Excuse me! Ms. Byron was pecking angrily at the tangle of wires drooping out of the dashboard. What do you mean you can't remember which ones go to the factory? She clucked. Get out of the way. Let me do it. Honestly, you're hopeless. But little thing goes wrong and you're all fussing around like a head... like a lot of headless... Excuse me, Kevin repeated. Nobody paid him any attention. A bulky leghorn cross had got her claw on one wire and another in her beak, just as a Plymouth Rock connected two other bits of wire together. For a split second the leghorn was hanging in mid-air with no visible means of support, and when it finally landed its plumage was fluffed wildly out like a feather duster. Kevin looked back. The humans were still there, but they could wander off at any moment. Nothing for it. He stuck his chest out, threw his head back, and crowed for all he was worth. It got him noticed at any rate. The hens all stopped what they were doing and stared, while Miss Byron gave him a filthy look and said, What are you making that ridiculous noise for? Humans, he replied, as soon as he'd got his breath back. Over there. To her credit, Ms. Byron didn't need to be told twice. Spreading her wings, she flew up off the dashboard, through the window, and quite some way across the yard before touching down, and as soon as her claws met the concrete, she started running, with 30 hens in close pursuit. For some reason, Kevin didn't follow her. He stayed where he was and watched as Ms. Byron hurtled towards the humans, yelling, Become peace, take us your leader! It was a valiant effort, he thought, but he had a feeling she'd forgotten something. Oh, look, Eileen said. Chickens. Her husband had already seen them for himself. Though a townie to the core, he'd seen chickens before, when he was a kid, just after the war. Several families on their street had kept a few hens in their back gardens, and he could remember being allowed to poke bits of wilted cabbage through the wire at them, that being what passed for excitement in the austerity-era Britain. So, although he hardly regarded himself as an expert, he reckoned he knew a little bit about poultry. Enough, at least, to be fairly sure they weren't supposed to charge you making blood-curdling squawking noises. Also, he'd seen the birds when it first came out, and it had made quite the impression on him. Come on, Eileen, he said, trying to sound calm so as not to alarm her. Let's go, shall we? Why are all those chickens? Indeed. Why did the chicken cross the yard? One of life's mysteries. I said, come on, he said. Let's get out of here. He didn't have to argue his case any further. The feathered horde was sweeping towards him like an incoming wave, and Eileen had seen Hitchcock's masterpiece too. In fact, they'd seen it together in the back row of the 1 and 9s, which was why there were large chunks of the film they were quite hazy about, but they remembered the gist of it. Let's run, Eileen said. Trouble was, the chickens could run faster. Quite soon the horrible things were flowing around their ankles, clucking and flapping their nasty wings, and they didn't seem inclined to take shoo for an answer. George and Eileen couldn't bring themselves to tread on them, and if they'd had the dexterity to kick moving chickens while running, they would have been playing in the Premier League instead of running a dry cleaning business. In fact, things could have turned quite nasty if Mr. Williams hadn't spotted. Quick, he said, in here. The gate was tied with a strand or two of heavily frayed baler twine, but it came loose when he yanked hard at it. They darted through and slammed the gate behind them, scattering chickens like sea spray. Eileen leaned against it, while he fumbled to reconnect the bits of string into a coherent fastening. That's all right, he said, breathing heavily. For a moment there. George, said Eileen, there's a pig in here. So there was. A great big thing, pink with black spots and a ring through its nose like a teenager. On the other hand, it wasn't a chicken.
"Don't tease it," he said. "It will leave us alone."
"I'm not teasing it," Eileen replied. "George, do something." It wasn't quite his finest hour, but it did make the shortlist. Stepping carefully around the pig and grimly not looking down at what he was actually walking in, he went to the other end of the high-walled concrete enclosure, opened a little gate, and held it for her while she scuttled through. Not a word, the parfait genteel night.
"Let's go home,"
he said. They took a long detour to make sure they stayed well away from the other side of the yard, just in case the chickens reappeared, but they got back on the road without any further trouble. They didn't talk much on the walk back. The view didn't seem quite so charming now they knew the sort of savage creatures likely to be roaming about in it. They had a nasty moment when they came around a bend and saw a cow's head sticking over a gate staring at them, but they crossed over to the other side of the lane and ignored it, and nothing had happened. "George," said Eileen, "those chickens, they were driving that car."
"I know."
She didn't say any more, but she didn't need to. Chickens that drove old Cortinas and mobbed humans didn't belong in the normal world. They had to be another manifestation of it, which meant it didn't stop at the shop door, and they couldn't just walk away, even for a little while. Clearly there was no point in complaining, making a fuss, no point in ringing the local paper or you and yours, or writing to their MP, even if they ever stopped still in one place long enough to even have one. All they could do was knuckle down and put up with it. Put up with it. And hope that eventually, one day, it'd stop of its own accord. Not much of a hope, but still. George. They stood rooted to the ground. Here, in this lay-by, next to this gate, opposite that double helping of landscape, was where their ill-starred walk had started. Here was where the shop had been when they set out. Here was now where the shop was not.
"Oh, God,"
George said. The shop had moved on again, and this time it had left without them. You'd think the shop would have waited for them for a minute, wouldn't you? Seriously, they look after it day in, day out, and do they look after it? No. Jeepers creepers, what's going on? Why has the shop disappeared? Will they ever get over the fact that they saw chickens driving a Cortina and not a Lamborghini? You'd think maybe a Lamborghini might be better because they're a bit lower to the ground, but then again, I suppose you can only really drive what you find around. The chickens didn't really have that much choice and probably not the means to earn the money to buy a Lamborghini. I don't get the whole thing with Lamborghinis. It's not really my jam. Sorry, a bit of a tangent there. So, there we go. That was Chapter 11 of Life, Liberty and the Pursuit of Sausages, J.W. Wells and Co. Book 7. Next one is Chapter 12, coming up in a couple of days. My goodness me, how many chapters are left in here? Let me just scoot through. I think it's 15. Is it 15 or is it 14? Or is it 16? Oh, 16. Oh, forgot about this one. It is quite a long one. It's 17 chapters. 16 chapters. It's just 16 chapters. Chapter 16 is a double chapter, so that's going to be quite a hefty one to do. Sorry for all the waffling. Much apologies, but, filling in time. That sort of thing. Oh, it's like I'm talking to you, you see. It's so nice, and it's just like we're having a little bit of a conversation, and everything's lovely and fluffy. Anywho, I'll stop saying a lot, which I'm very aware of today for some reason. My mind's gone blank again. I need to prep and plan for these things. I need to prep and plan a tune each time and not just wing it and hope that it'll kind of like work out well. Oh my goodness. I nothing's springing to mind right now. I still need to get back to the 80s themes or something. But yeah, the only one that comes to mind is Golden Girls, but that doesn't really count, I don't think. Does it? I never watched it the first time. Or the second. Probably about the fourth rerun. I maybe watched it. But who was your favourite Golden Girl? Was it Blanche's sassiness? Was it Maria Petrillo's snarkiness? Was it Dorothy's eyebrow raising and breaking the fourth wall and looking at the camera? Or was it our lovely Betty White? I loved her. She was an icon in real life, but as the sweet Rose Nyland who had a spine of steel. But, as ever, if you could hit the like button if you did enjoy this chapter, if you could hit the notifications bell if you haven't already, share and subscribe. You know, the usual whiffle that I normally do. Much apologies for doing it every time, but it does really help the channel, I can't even tell you. Keeps the lights on. Keeps the lights on and a roof over your head, as it were. What keeps things going. I just know it's worthwhile. As I said, we're getting some great suggestions for the next series to do. Please just keep them coming. As I said, we've got some glorious suggestions that are brilliant so far. And even if we don't do particular suggestions on the next one, we can certainly do them in the next ones after that. You know what I mean? It seems like we've got a nice little thing going here. And I like it. It's nice to all be connected this way. It's like a little book club, but in a different sort of way. I'll stop the waffling now because I'm nearly at 2 minutes. Not 2 minutes, I'm nearly at an hour. Jeepers creepers. And I think we're going to have the flumps today. So, pop, 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 pop. I can never remember how it goes after that bit. I like the start of it, but I can't remember how it goes on after that. I'm going to have to watch a few episodes. The flumps were awesome. Anyway, take it easy. Take care. Big love. Have lots of good cups of tea or coffee or whichever you prefer. What is your favourite beverage? I know these are daft questions, but I'm just interested. But most of all, rest well. Have a wonderful couple of days. And I'll see you soon, Petal. Take it easy now.